In Nigeria, elections are not just about votes. They are about power, identity, and survival. And at the center of it all is one institution, the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC. But what happens when the man chosen to lead the institution becomes the subject of controversy? From past statements to rising religious concerns to growing political resistance in a large segment of the country or among the Gen Z, the people who are said to be the majority in Nigeria. Nigeria is once again asking a familiar question. Can the referee be trusted? This is the other side. My name is Rimamnde Shawulu. Before the controversy, there was the man, Professor Joash Amupitan, a senior advocate of Nigeria, a constitutional lawyer, a figure deeply embedded in Nigeria's legal and political elite. For years, he operated within the high-level legal circles of Nigeria. He had even delivered a lecture on the floor of the House of Representatives. For years, working closely around the structures of power to supporters, his experience and advantage, deep knowledge of the law, familiar with governance, institutional competence. But to critics, it raises concern because in Nigeria, proximity to power is rarely seen as neutral. It is often interpreted as alignment. And in an electoral system already under scrutiny, this perception matters, or if it did not matter, for now, it does matter very seriously. His appointment followed constitutional procedures, nominated by the president as enshrined in the Constitution. He was screened by the Senate, confirmed through due process. On paper, everything was in order. But Nigeria's politics is not driven by procedure alone. It is driven by trusts. Even at the confirmation stage, questions began to emerge. Can he act independently? Is the system becoming too centralized? At the time, those concerns were contained, but they will no longer remain so for long. Then came the digital storm. Alleged media posts linked to Professor Amupitan began to circulate on X, blogs, and messaging platforms. Screenshots spread rapidly. Some of these posts were interpreted as politically opinionated, possibly partisan, and in some cases, religiously sensitive. Within hours, the narrative shifted. This was no longer just about qualifications. It became a question of neutrality. It became a question of trying to scrub or remove evidence. And this was being carried out by a professor of the law of evidence. But the situation was far from clear. Some of the alleged posts have remained unverified, disputed, or are said to lack attribution. Yet in politics, perception often moves faster than evidence. And once doubt is introduced, it rarely disappears. But that was not the first controversy of the professor. When he was appointed, at the beginning, there were protests from some segments of Nigeria. What was the issue? The issue was religion. The professor had been a consultant to a group that was making presentation to an international body, and he had profiled opinion that, in his estimation, Christians were being targeted in Nigeria. Within segments of Nigeria's Muslim community, concerns began. Clerics, commentators, political voices pointed to alleged posts, interpreting them as insensitive or biased. Others framed the issue more broadly. In a country already balancing religious tension, can the electoral umpire afford even the perception of bias? Reactions varied. Some were cautious, others were direct. Most were rooted in concern, not uniform rejection. But the signal was clear. Trust was beginning to fracture. At the same time, northern political elites began to respond. Elders, former officials, influential stakeholders, their concerns extended beyond tweets. They asked deeper questions. Is there a regional imbalance in power? Can they not trust the electoral process under his leadership? Are past grievances being repeated? Of course, for people from some sections of the North, this was important for them, notwithstanding the fact that for the first time in Nigeria's history, the chair of the electoral empire comes from one ethnic group that has not been privileged to lead the National Electoral Commission. When he was appointed, his appointment seemed to have satisfied two groups: minorities in the Middle Belt, who also had been complaining that they had been marginalized because the professor comes from Kogi State, one of the states regarded as a Middle Belt state. But not just that, he is of the Yoruba ethnic group extraction, a group that had not in the past ever been trusted with the powers of the electoral umpire in Nigeria. This was not the concern of the critics. For them, it was a strategic signaling, a warning that confidence in the system was weakening. And in Nigeria's political structure, elite distrust often shapes mass perception. Of course, this is not the first time Nigeria's electoral umpires have been mired in controversies. Under Professor Maurice Iwu, the 2007 elections were widely criticized. Observers described them as deeply flawed. Public trust collapsed. Even the president, who won the election, described the elections as flawed. And because he thought they were severely flawed, he decided to set up a commission to reform the electoral process. Of course, President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua did not live long to see the results of the electoral reforms that he initiated, most of which have been reversed by his fellow statesman, President Muhammadu Buhari. Under Professor Attahiru Jega, reforms were introduced. Biometric systems improved credibility. Of course, the improvements were attributed to President Goodluck Jonathan, the man who appointed Attahiru Jega as the electoral umpire without knowing him, the man who allowed elections to be credible, so credible that he was indeed voted out of office. Biometric systems improve credibility, yet accusations of bias still emerged from multiple sides. Under Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, the elections became more technological but more controversy. They were also more contested. 23 elections raised questions about transparency, result transmission, and institutional reliability. Each chairman, of course, as we can see from the brief history above, had their controversies. They arrived with promise of improved electoral system, but ended up in some kind of controversy. Of course, this raises a very serious question. Is it the institution that corrupts people, or the problem is with individuals? Let us be clear about the current situation. Allegations alone are not enough. There must be evidence of misconduct. But democracy does not operate on law alone. It operates on belief. And when citizens begin to doubt the system, even a lawful process can lose legitimacy. The current controversy has been mismanaged by the umpire himself. The Nigerian law does not require that the electoral umpire or workers in the election should not vote. They are allowed to vote. As a matter of fact, there were some preparations to ensure that the people working in the electoral system cast their votes before the election so that they could move freely to conduct the process of election. The law only provides that the people who conduct these elections are unbiased. What does that mean? Does it mean that if you are a voter, you are biased? Certainly not. The law by itself will be contradictory if it disallows the people who conduct elections to vote. And so the question is, why is there controversy today? The controversy arises, of course, from the fact that the INEC and Professor Joash Amupitan have been attempting or trying to remove evidence or to deny what should have been admitted in the first place. Because by 2023, Joash Amupitan was not the chairman of the INEC. He was a voter. He had the right to vote. And so there was really no need for him to deny that he authored a tweet which was on his verified handle. The fact that he denied, or the fact that excuses are being brought up, have foiled and given life to the allegations of possible bias actions. Take a look at the controversy that President Bill Clinton faced when he had that sexual relationship with Monica Lewinsky. It may be inappropriate for the president to use his office to have such an amorous relationship. But what finally nailed Bill Clinton and made the United States House of Representatives to impeach him was the fact that he lied by denying that he had a relationship with Monica Lewinsky. And in this case, if the INEC chairman, a professor of evidence, had simply admitted to the fact that he voted and supported Tinubu in 2023, the matter, in my opinion, would have died because he had a right at that time to choose to vote for any person that he wanted to vote for. But the denials, the attempt to change the profiles of the X account, and the attempts to blame hackers have given life to this controversy, which should not have been a controversy in the first place. And so what lies ahead? As Nigeria moves towards 2027, the stakes are rising. 4 possible paths now emerge. Stability, where trust is restored. Manage distrust, where skepticism lingers. Polarization, where identity politics deepens. Or crisis, where the system itself is rejected. Which path Nigeria takes will depend on how this moment is handled. In the end, this is not just about Professor Amupitan. It is about trust. Because when people stop believing that their votes count, democracy itself begins to fade. This is the other side. My name is Rimamnde Shawulu.